Chapter 18. One Hotel Room. The silence of the Savoy suite was louder than the London traffic below. It was one of those rooms that felt too large and too small at the same time. High ceilings with ornate crown molding, velvet curtains that blocked out the gray morning, and a bed, a massive, king-sized altar of white linen that seemed to dominate the space. Because of the security threat and the press swarm, Alexander's mother had insisted on a single, reinforced suite for the duration of the trip. One room, one bed. One night of secrets. I sat at the small vanity, staring at my reflection. I looked tired. The text message from the unknown number was still burned into my mind. Ask him about the night agreement of 2012. Alexander was in the bathroom, the sound of the shower a steady, rhythmic hiss behind the marble door. We had barely spoken since the meeting with Lord Knight. The victory felt hollow, a gilded cage built on the bones of whatever happened 10 years ago. The shower stopped. A few minutes later, the door opened and Alexander stepped out, a cloud of steam following him. He was wearing nothing but a white towel slung low on his hips. Droplets of water clung to the dark hair on his chest, trailing down the hard, defined lines of his abdomen. He didn't look like a CEO right now. He looked like a god made of granite and shadow. "You're still up," he said, his voice a low, gravelly vibration. "I couldn't sleep. The rain is too loud." "The rain isn't the problem, Maya." He walked toward me, his movements fluid and predatory even in his exhaustion. He stopped behind my chair, his hands resting on my shoulders. His skin was hot, the scent of expensive soap and his natural musk hitting me like a physical wave. "You've been 1,000 miles away since we left the Savoy." I looked at his hands in the mirror, large, powerful, and currently very gentle. "Alexander, tell me the truth. Is there anything about your mother or Lord Knight that I should know? Anything from the past?" I felt the muscles in his hands stiffen. It was a microscopic shift, but I felt it. "The past is a graveyard, Maya. Digging in it only brings up ghosts that don't belong in the light. And if those ghosts are still haunting the halls of Blackwood Industries..." I turned in the chair, looking up at him. "Someone sent me a message. They mentioned 2012. They said you can't protect me." Alexander's eyes turned into shards of ice. He let go of my shoulders and walked toward the window, pulling back the curtain just an inch to look at the street below. "My mother has many enemies. So do I. They use whatever leverage they can find to plant seeds of doubt. It's a standard psychological play." "Then tell me it's a lie. Tell me there was no night agreement." He didn't answer. He stayed silhouetted against the gray London light, his back a wall of tension. "Alexander." "It was a business transaction," he said finally, his voice devoid of emotion. Astaire Knight wanted a specific outcome for a merger. A woman was compromised. To ensure that outcome. My mother handled the details. I was 24, Maya. I was the face of the company, but I wasn't the hand that moved the pieces. "A woman was compromised. What does that mean?" He turned to face me, and the look in his eyes made my breath hitch. It was a look of raw, unadulterated regret. "It means she was discarded when she was no longer useful. It means my mother protected the name at the expense of a human life. And that is why I will never, ever let her have a say in your future." He walked back to me, kneeling on the floor so he was at my eye level. He took my hands in his grip almost desperate. "I am not my mother, Maya, and you are not a transaction. We are in this one hotel room because it is the only place in the world where I can ensure no one touches you. Do you understand?" "I want to believe you," I whispered. "Then believe me with your eyes closed." He leaned in, his mouth finding mine in a kiss that was filled with a desperate, silent plea. It wasn't the kiss of a conqueror. It was the kiss of a man who was trying to drown out the noise of his own history. I reached out, my fingers finding the damp hair at the nape of his neck, pulling him closer. In this one room, with the world waiting outside the door, the only thing that felt real was the heat of his skin and the weight of his words. Alexander POV. I wanted to tell her everything. I wanted to lay my soul bare and tell her about the 2012 scandal, about the woman named Sarah who had been the first to sit at my right hand, and how my mother had systematically destroyed her when she became a distraction. But I couldn't, not yet. If Maya knew the full extent of what the Blackwood family was capable of, she would run. And I would rather have her hate me in this room than have her safe in another country. That was the truth I couldn't say. My love for her was a selfish, possessive thing. It was a cage I had built for both of us. I pulled her from the chair and onto the bed, the white linen a stark contrast to her dark hair. I moved over her, my towel discarded, my body a map of the hunger I had been trying to suppress since we landed at Heathrow. "Alexander," she gasped, her hands sliding up my chest. "Don't talk," I growled against her skin. "No more questions, no more ghosts, just this." I claimed her with a ferocity that was meant to erase the memory of that text message. I wanted to fill her mind with the sensation of me, the weight of my body, the rasp of my voice, the way I knew exactly where to touch her to make her arch her back and cry out. She met me with a fire that matched my own. In the one hotel room, the rules of professional distance were a joke. We were two animals in a gilded box, fighting to find a way to be one. I moved between her legs, my eyes locked on hers. I wanted to see the moment she let go. I wanted to see the moment the doubt vanished and there was only us. "You're mine, Maya," I whispered, my voice a low, primal rasp. "In London, in New York, in the dark, you are the only thing that is real." "I'm yours," she whispered back, her fingers digging into my back. As I moved inside her, the world outside, the night group, the media, my mother, it all faded into a blur of gray noise. There was only the heat of the room, the scent of jasmine and sandalwood, and the realization that I would do anything, to keep this woman in my bed, even if it meant becoming the monster she was afraid of. Maya POV 2:00 a.m. The room was cool now, the air conditioning humming a low, steady tune. Alexander was asleep, his arm draped across my waist, pinning me to him. He looked so peaceful in the dark, the lines of tension in his face finally smoothed away. I reached out and traced the line of his jaw, my heart aching with a mixture of love and terror. He had admitted it. The night agreement was real. A woman had been discarded. I looked at the phone on the nightstand. I wanted to pick it up and search for the name Sarah. I wanted to know what had happened to her. But as I looked at Alexander, I realized that I didn't need a search engine to tell me the truth. I was seeing it in the way he held me. I was seeing it in the way he had reacted to the text. He was terrified that history was going to repeat itself. I shifted closer to him, my head resting on his chest. I could hear his heart, a slow, steady beat that felt like the foundation of my world. In this one hotel room, we had found a kind of peace. But I knew that the morning would bring the Guildhall Gala. It would bring the public appearance. It would bring the trial my mother had promised. I wasn't Sarah. I wasn't a transaction. I was the woman who wrote the code, and I was the woman who loved the monster. If Alina Blackwood wanted a trial, I would give her one, but I wouldn't be the one on the stand. I closed my eyes, the exhaustion finally taking over. As I drifted off to sleep, I made a promise to the man holding me. "I won't let them break us, Alexander, even if I have to burn the graveyard down myself. Alexander POV morning. I woke up to the sound of Maya in the shower. I stayed in bed for a moment, staring at the ceiling. The events of the night before were a blur of heat and intensity, but the cold reality of the day was already settling in. Tonight was the Guildhall Gala. The world would see us. My mother would be there, watching for the slightest sign of weakness. Alistair Knight would be there, waiting to see if his investment was safe. I got out of bed and walked to the window. The rain had stopped, but the sky was still a flat, bruised gray. My phone buzzed on the nightstand. It was a message from Marcus. Sir. The press has found the 2012 archives. A tabloid is planning to run the Sarah Jenkins story tonight, just as the gala starts. They're going to link her to Maya. They're calling it the Blackwood pattern. I felt a surge of rage, so pure it was almost blinding. I walked to the bathroom door and listened to the sound of the water. They were coming for her. They were using the ghost of a dead woman to haunt the living. Alexander. Maya's voice came from inside. Is everything okay? Everything is fine, I said, my voice as hard as a diamond. Get ready, Maya. Tonight, we don't just walk the red carpet, we set it on fire. I walked back to the desk and picked up the phone. Marcus, I want that tabloid bought, not sued, bought. I want the owner in my office in 30 minutes. And Marcus. Yes, sir. Find out who sent that text to Maya. I want a name. And then I want that person removed from the industry. Permanently. I hung up. The one hotel room was no longer a sanctuary. It was a command center. I looked at the tuxedo laid out on the chair. It was black, sharp, and unforgiving. Tonight, I wasn't going to be the man who loved her. I was going to be the man who owned the room. And God help anyone who tried to stand in our way. Maya POV. I stepped out of the shower and wrapped myself in a plush robe. Alexander was standing by the desk, his back to me. He looked different than he had a few hours ago. The vulnerability was gone. The softness was gone. He was the wall of iron again. What happened? I asked, walking toward him. He turned, and the intensity in his gaze made me stop. The world is trying to find its way into this room, Maya. They're trying to use my past to define your future. The 2012 story. They're calling it a patterns. They think I collect women like you and discard them when the deal is done. He walked to me and took my face in his hands. They don't know who we are. They don't know that you're the one who owns me. Then let's tell them, I said, my chin tilted up. Not with words, with everything else. He kissed me, a hard, brief seal of the alliance we had forged in the dark. Wear the black gown, the one with the open back. I want them to see the woman who isn't afraid of the ghosts. Alexander POV. The hotel room was filled with the sounds of preparation. Stylists, tailors, and security personnel moved in and out, a whirlwind of high-end activity. But through it all, Maya and I stayed in our own circle. I watched her as the stylist worked on her hair. She looked calm. More than calm, she looked lethal. She had accepted the challenge. She had decided to stop being the victim of the story and start being the author. Mr. Blackwood, a tailor murmured, adjusting the shoulder of my tuxedo. You look formidable. That's the goal, I replied. I looked at Maya in the mirror. Our eyes met, and for a second the room vanished. The stylists, the security, the pattern, it was all gone. There was only the woman who had seen my scars and decided to stay. One hotel room, she whispered, her lips curving into a small, dangerous smile. One hotel room, I agreed. The doors opened. The elevator was waiting. As we stepped out of the suite and toward the gala that would decide our fate, I realized that the one hotel room hadn't just been a place to sleep. It had been the forge where we had finally become unbreakable. Act II was fire. And as we stepped into the London night, I realized that we weren't just the fuel. We were the inferno. Maya POV. The lobby of the Savoy was a sea of photographers. The moment we emerged from the elevator, the flashes began. It was a blinding, rhythmic pulse of light. Alexander didn't flinch. He placed his hand on the small of my back, his grip firm and possessive. Alexander, what about Sarah Jenkins? Maya, are you aware of the 2012 agreement? We didn't look at them. We didn't answer. We walked through the lobby like royalty walking through a crowd of peasants. The Bentley was waiting at the curb. We stepped inside, and the silence of London luxury returned. Are you ready? Alexander asked, looking at me in the dim light of the car. I was born ready, I replied. The car pulled away, heading toward the Guildhall. The one hotel room was behind us, but its heat was still with me. I looked at the man beside me. He was a monster, perhaps. He was a billionaire, certainly. But he was mine. And as the Guildhall came into view, illuminated like a castle against the London sky, I realized that the world could say whatever it wanted. They couldn't touch what happened in that room, and they certainly couldn't touch what was about to happen next. Alexander POV. The Guildhall was a monument to power and tradition. As the car pulled up to the red carpet, I felt the shift in Maya's energy. She wasn't nervous. She was focused. She was the woman who had survived the takeover, the gala, and the Aunt Evelyn scandal. I stepped out of the car and offered my hand. She took it, her fingers warm and steady. She stepped out into the light, her black gown shimmering like a starless night. The flashes were so intense they were almost solid. Smile, Maya, I whispered as we began the walk toward the entrance. Let them see the woman who has already won. She smiled, a slow, beautiful, lethal expression that made the photographers gasp. We reached the top of the stairs, where my mother and Lord Knight were waiting. Eleanor Blackwood looked at us with a mixture of surprise and begrudging respect. Lord Knight simply nodded, his eyes fixed on Maya. Welcome to the Guildhall, Alexander, Lord Knight said. I see you've brought your partner. I've brought the reason we're all here, Alistair, I said, my voice ringing through the lobby. We walked past them and into the ballroom. The music was playing, the champagne was flowing, and every head in the room turned to watch us. The one hotel room was gone. The pattern was being rewritten. And as I led Maya onto the dance floor for the first dance of the evening, I realized that Act II was no longer about survival. It was about the claim. Maya POV. The music was a slow, sweeping waltz. Alexander held me close, his hand on my waist, his eyes fixed on mine. We weren't just dancing. We were making a statement. We were showing the world that we were locked in, not by a contract, but by choice. You're doing it, he whispered as we spun past his mother. Doing what? Owning the room. I looked at the diamonds and the tuxedos, the power and the greed. It all looked so small from where I was standing. I don't want the room, Alexander, I said, my voice barely a whisper. I just want you. You have me, he said, his grip tightening. Forever. The dance ended and the applause followed. We had survived the one hotel room. We had survived the London rain. But as the night continued, I saw a familiar face in the crowd. A man in a waiter's jacket watching us from the shadows of a pillar. Caleb Thorne. The fire wasn't out. It was just getting started. But as Alexander leaned down to kiss my hand, I realized that I wasn't afraid anymore. Because whatever Caleb or Vane or Eleanor had planned, they had one fatal flaw in their strategy. They thought we were separate targets. They didn't realize that in that one hotel room, we had become a single, unbreakable force. And in Act II, that was the only thing that mattered. Alexander POV. I saw him too, Caleb Thorne hiding in plain sight. I felt the surge of rage, but I kept my face a mask of calm. I wouldn't let him ruin this night. I wouldn't let him touch the piece we had found. I caught Marcus's eye across the room and gave a single, sharp nod toward the pillar. Within seconds, 2 security guards were moving toward the shadows. Caleb was gone before the next song began. I turned back to Maya. She was glowing, her beauty a weapon that was currently dismantling every doubt in the room. "Let's go home," I said, leaning close to her ear. "Back to the suite. Back to the penthouse, back to the city where we started. The night group is secure, the board is silent, the weekend is over." "And the fire?" she asked, her eyes searching mine. "The fire is just getting started, Maya. But this time, we're the ones who control the burn." We walked out of the guild hall, the red carpet a path of gold beneath our feet. The London rain began to fall again, but we didn't feel it. We were locked in. And for the first time in my life, I knew exactly what that meant. Next chapter, Chapter 19, Boundaries Tested.